Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're decoding one of the most fascinating geographic anomalies on the United States map. I mean, if you've ever stared at it, you've definitely noticed it. But you might not have realized that this single strange border represents centuries of imperial conflict, stubborn colonial politics, and a fierce battle over just one single port city.
Okay, let's dive straight into the mystery. Why on earth does Florida have this remarkably long, narrow western strip? When you look at the geography, it stretches nearly 200 miles straight across the bottom of the Deep South. It really makes you wonder, why doesn't that land just belong to Alabama? I mean, Alabama is sitting directly to the north and desperately needs that coastal access, right?
It's honestly a wild visual contrast when you put them side by side. Alabama gets stuck with this tiny, restricted sliver of coastline, literally just over 50 miles long, while Florida boasts this massive, sprawling western reach that completely dominates the Gulf. Florida's basically walling off the southern borders of both Alabama and Georgia from the Gulf of Mexico. And this isn't just a quirk of cartography or some random mistake by a sleepy mapmaker. It's the physical result of a deep historical tug of war, setting up a geopolitical puzzle that completely shaped the American South.
Part 1. The Early Clues. From native lands to colonial claims.
So to figure this out, we have to go back way before modern borders were ever drawn or even conceived. This region was shaped by thriving ancient Native American tribes and complex early settlements. But that dynamic shifted violently and permanently in the 1500s. That's when Spanish ships and explorers arrive, seeking gold and territorial dominance, and they set up some of the earliest European footholds in the New World. Fast forward to the 1700s, and this specific, narrow strip of land had become a hotly contested prize. Control was constantly shifting among rival European empires. We're talking about an era where lines on maps were being drawn and redrawn in palaces across London, Paris, and Madrid by people totally disconnected from the actual geography of North America.
So, before the U.S. even existed as a nation, this territory was already deeply fractured. If you look at old maps from that era, European jurisdictions were constantly flux. You had the Spanish heavily fortifying their position in Pensacola, the French locking down their own stronghold in nearby Mobile, and the British continuously pushing down from their colonies up north. They were all basically moving the boundaries based on where their ships managed to land, which river mouths they could control, and what forts they could actually defend against raids. It was a chaotic frontier for sure, and this massive colonial mess set the perfect stage for the border disputes that were about to happen.
Part 2. Drawing the lines. The Alabama-Florida conflict. Okay, so when the United States finally acquires this territory through treaties with Spain in the early 19th century, they inherit an absolute geopolitical nightmare. As Florida becomes a recognized U.S. territory in the 1820s and begins the long push for statehood, the internal borders are fiercely negotiated over in Washington. Alabama had already become a state in 1819, and they aggressively pushed to annex the Panhandle. And honestly, their argument made perfect geographical and economic sense. Major rivers flowed south from Alabama, directly through the Panhandle and right into the Gulf. Alabama's booming agricultural economy desperately needed to control those deep-water ports to ship out timber and cotton. They argued that dropping the state lines straight down to the water was the only logical solution. But Florida fought back with everything they had, mounting a massive political campaign to specifically retain its western lands and protect its colonial crown jewel.
And that brings us to Pensacola, which is the true key to this entire mystery. Despite Alabama's incredibly strong push to just drop that border straight down to the water, Pensacola's deep historical and colonial roots anchored the entire western strip to Florida forever. You see, Pensacola wasn't just some small coastal town. It had served as the capital of British West Florida and was this vital, thriving hub for Spanish colonial operations for centuries. It had the infrastructure, the military fortifications, and immense historical prestige. Florida's territorial politicians basically went to Congress and argued that stripping Pensacola away would rob the territory of its richest historical asset and its absolute main economic engine on the western coast. For them, it was totally non-negotiable. And because Florida fiercely refused to let Pensacola go, they managed to drag the entire Panhandle along with it, basically forcing Alabama to settle for that tiny sliver of coast they have today.
Part 3. The Resolution. The Modern Panhandle.
So, what does this all mean for us today? Well, those centuries-old, hard-fought border decisions gave Florida a region completely distinct in its culture and economy. Today, this stretch of land, which is often called the Emerald Coast, is famously packed with beautiful Gulf beaches that drive a massive tourism industry. It's got thriving coastal cities, incredibly vibrant ocean landscapes, and highly strategic military bases, like the sprawling Naval Air Station Pensacola, which relies entirely on that specific protected coastal geography. Culturally, it often feels way more closely tied to the Deep South than to somewhere like Miami. But legally, it is fiercely Floridian. And all of this belongs to the Sunshine State today simply because of a colonial anchor centuries ago.
The ultimate takeaway from our investigation today is that this weird geographic anomaly is absolutely no accident. When you look at Florida's unique, sprawling outline, you are literally looking at the physical, lasting footprint of human history. It's the direct result of natural geography colliding with intense diplomatic decisions made hundreds of years ago by people fighting fiercely over one single historic port city.
And I think this quote perfectly summarizes our journey. Every line on a map tells a story. So the next time you're looking at a map of the United States, try not to just see arbitrary shapes. Ask yourself, who fought for that line? What deep historical compromises were made? And what forgotten histories were completely rewritten just to draw it? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep exploring.